Hey, what's up guys? In this video, I'll be taking a look back at my gaming experience in 2022. We're talking epic highs, devastating lows and everything in between. From the consoles I bought to the different unique games I played. I'll be giving you the inside scoop of what went down. And of course at the end, I'll be revealing my personal game of the year for 2022, so stay tuned for that. I usually like to start this year in reviews reflecting at all the games I finished in that year. As you can see here, the first half of the year was a bit of a dry spell for me. Besides the Halo Combat Evolved campaign, I didn't finish another game from January to May. So what exactly happened here? Well, for one, I was deep in the trenches of multiplayer madness, especially when Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel came out in January and basically took over my life. In addition, I also started and promptly dropped a lot of games like Pokemon Legend Arceus, as well as just life getting in the way. The second half of the year definitely picked up the slack in that regard. When I look back at all the games I finished, a major theme that stands out is that 2022 was the year of variety and experimentation. I branched out of my comfort zone and played games from all sorts of genres and developers, but most importantly on all sorts of platforms too. If you compare 2022 to my 2020 and 2021, you can clearly see that my game library was mainly centered around the Nintendo Switch. But not this year. This year I had more of a balanced gaming experience, mainly referring to the PlayStation 5. With more balance across platforms, I was able to explore a wider range of gaming worlds and experiences than ever before. That actually brings me to the PlayStation 5. If you have seen my previous 2-year in reviews, you'll know I've been dying to get my hands on one for the last 2 years. And after much crying and lamenting, I finally managed to snag one in August. I'll save my full PlayStation 5 console review for another video in the future, but now let's talk about why I'm so excited. With this console and PlayStation Plus Deluxe, I can finally play all the critically acclaimed Sony exclusive titles that have eluded me for the PS4 generation, like Horizon Zero Dawn, Bloodborne and Ghost of Tsushima. This console has really been a game changer for me. It's because of the PS5 that I was able to finish my very first Souls game, that being the PlayStation 5 launch title, Demon's Souls. And let me tell you, for my first Soul experience, it was an absolute blast, and now I'm really excited to try the rest of the Soulborne games. While the Demon's Souls remake was a great PlayStation 5 exclusive and a fantastic showcase for the PS5, I really want to focus on one major hitter from Sony IPs that really became huge in the later part of 2022, that being the God of War duology. Now firstly, let's talk about God of War 2018, the game that was incredibly well received by critics and fans alike, even winning the coveted Game of the Year award back in 2018. Unfortunately, it was actually my biggest disappointment of 2022. My biggest issue with the game was its pacing. There were too many story interruptions, roadblocks, and backtracking moments that detracted from the main objective. It felt like there was always something stopping me from just clearing a very simple story objective. End up going to an area, find out that there's a roadblock, backtrack into another area, get something or do something, then come back to the original area, only to find out that you have to go do another thing. This doesn't just happen once or twice, it happens repeatedly throughout the game, making it feel like the macro storyline wasn't going anywhere. While the game did have some character growth and development, it was difficult to stay engaged and be immersed with it when the macro storyline felt stagnant. The one camera shot direction sounds cool on paper, but in practice it results in a game that was peppered with disguised loading screen everywhere. There were so many slow and tedious climbing, crawling, walking, and boat rowing sections. This coupled with the game's linear hallway level design and recycled enemy encounters detracted from the immersive storytelling experience that the developers were clearly aiming for. And honestly, God of War 2018 is one of those games that heavily relies on its story. If you didn't like the story, you probably didn't like the game. And for me, the story just didn't click with me. The father and son dynamic of Kratos and Atreus was just not very compelling. There were a handful of really impactful scenes, such as the sequence that took place in the middle of the game, with just incredible presentation that really amplified the moment. But a handful of these scenes doesn't make up for the rest of the really boring walkie-talkie sections. The second half of the story also suffers from a significant drop in quality, with character development that didn't align with the stakes of the adventure, and the story just didn't recover from that point on, leading to, in my opinion, an unearned ending with a very weird and puzzling payoff, ultimately feeling more like a sequel bait than a satisfying conclusion. With all that being said, it might actually come to you as a surprise that I really enjoyed my time with the sequel, God of War Ragnarok. And it is mainly due to the fact that the game just felt like a vast improvement in almost everything. Everything is amplified and expanded. There are more characters, more enemies, and more combat options. Plus, the journey and stakes are way higher than in 2018. It's not just a simple end goal that can honestly be achieved in 2 hours. but was instead paired up with lots of roadblocks and story interruptions. In contrast to that, Ragnarok's story has a grander sense of scope, which naturally makes you care more about what's happening or about to happen in the game. Ragnarok's macro story just covers more ground, exploring a wider range of locales, characters, and set pieces. Even a one-take camera was better executed in Ragnarok because of the gameplay variety present. In contrast to 2018, the way it's executed in Ragnarok is slightly different, with different perspectives that transition seamlessly during the downtime of the other perspective. This makes the pacing feels much quicker and much more refreshing, allowing you to bounce from perspective to perspective, engaging in a multitude of different set pieces as mentioned earlier. I also really like how they tied the world to the Norse mythology. It reminded me of my 2021 Game of the Year, The Great Ace Attorney Chronicles. That game featured the Sherlock Holmes universe in a significant way, yet because it's an interpretation on top of the Sherlock Holmes universe, the way the game managed to twist your expectations became a really cool plot point. Well, the same thing happens in Ragnarok. The way they use your prerequisite knowledge on Norse mythology to play with your expectation is extremely cool, and this results in a game that can both surprise you and really shock you. In general, I found the script and character work are a lot better written in Ragnarok, with the standout character being Odin, which honestly still shows in many scenes that features him. The father and son dynamic feels slightly less at the forefront. It definitely took a back seat in Ragnarok. Despite that, however, it's actually far more relatable and emotional for me. I really grew to like Kratos and Atreus in Ragnarok, which was something that was missing from my playthrough of 2018. Overall, God of War Ragnarok really redeemed the whole God of War Norse duology in my opinion, and I'm glad I was able to experience both games in 2022. Another console I bought in 2022 was the PlayStation Vita, and honestly for the first few months after I bought it, I was kind of disappointed with it. It was just collecting dust in my drawer. Until October of 2022 when I finally got COVID for the first time and had to quarantine myself. I've always had my eye on Persona 4 Golden, but in my busy schedule I never had a chance to really dive into it. But with quarantine, it was the perfect time to give it a shot. And let me tell you, Persona 4 Golden was a really magical moment for those 5 days of quarantine where I just let go of my real life and played up to 12 hours a day lying on my bed. And after finishing the game, I can confidently say that buying the PlayStation Vita was totally worth it just for Persona 4 Golden. And in terms of my thoughts on the game was an absolute blast to play through during quarantine. And I especially loved the interaction between the party members. It felt like I was getting to know each one of them personally. Playing Persona 4 Golden actually made me feel a bit envious. The game made me realize that I don't have that many close friends in real life, which actually turns out to be a very strange common sentiment among people who have played the game. Moving on, a big goal of mine for 2022 was to play more indie games. I'm happy to say that I was able to achieve that goal. While I played several great indie games throughout the year, two really stood out to me. The first was Stray, a game where you play as a cat in a cyberpunk world. Turns out, it's really fun to roleplay as a cat. I had a lot of fun platforming around and exploring the unique and charming cyberpunk setting as a cat. One of the things I really appreciate about this game was its length. At around 4 to 5 hours, it just felt right. The game doesn't have very deep mechanics. If it was any longer, the game might felt like a drag, but in this case, it was perfect. Stray was the only indie game I played that actually came out in 2022. So I guess in a traditional sense, Stray would have been my best indie game of 2022. However, if I'm actually talking about the best indie game I played in 2022 regardless of release date, I have to give it to The Messenger. This game was a blast to play, the platforming was super tight and the level designs were really creative. But what really surprised me was its writing. It was actually really good, with dialogues and plot points that were genuinely funny and engaging. Both Stray and The Messenger are available on PlayStation Plus Extra and I will 100% recommend them to anyone looking for fun indie games. Another goal I set for 2022 was to play the remaining Zelda games I had left. And I gotta say, I really enjoyed Skyward Sword HD. For the uninitiated, Skyward Sword was originally released during the twilight years of the Wii, so the game is heavily centered around motion controls. And I have to say, this is my favourite motion control game ever. The one-to-one feeling of swinging the Joy-Con as a sword just felt awesome at every turn. Every single encounter doesn't just feel like you're button mashing, and it's actually really immersive in a sense, seeing the direction you swing the sword in being reflected in the game. And I'll go on the record right now and say that this is my favourite Zelda combat ever. But it's not just the combat that's amazing, the dungeons and puzzles are also incredibly well crafted. As a long-time Zelda fan, playing Skyward Sword kind of reminded me of why I fell in love with the series to begin with. And to be honest, I've always felt like Breath of the Wild didn't quite capture that Zelda feeling, so playing through Skyward Sword made me feel incredibly nostalgic. And after experiencing the innovative motion controls in Skyward Sword, I'm now excited to try even more new and exciting experiences. I've been thinking a lot about VR lately, but unfortunately I just don't have the space or the money for it at the moment. But I definitely want to dive into VR as soon as I can, especially when it becomes more and more mainstream. Speaking of innovative, I want to talk about the best narrative direction, and the game I'm referring to is AI the Somnium Files Nirvana Initiative. This is a sequel to one of my favorite visual novel games. I was excited to dive back into this world and I thought I knew what to expect. But to say my expectations were wildly subverted would not be doing this game any justice. I don't want to spoil anything for those who haven't played it, but let's just say that the story direction and execution was so unique that I couldn't help but be completely enamored by it. The way the game plays with perspective and the narrative themes diving into stuff like the simulation theory really had me hooked. And of course, the murder mystery aspect kept me on the edge of my seat the entire time. While I wouldn't necessarily say it had the best story I played all year, the narrative direction was so intriguing and unexpected that I think it absolutely deserves a mention in this video. Before I review my 2022 Game of the Year, I want to talk about my favourite 2021 game I played in 2022, and that game is Marvel Guardians of the Galaxy. Now I have to say I have very low expectations coming to the game. I'm not a Marvel fan at all. I've watched like 2 movies and they're not the Guardian movies at all, so I know absolutely nothing about this ragtag group of heroes. So with that said, this game absolutely blew me away. I was pleasantly surprised by how much I love this game. Just prior to playing Marvel Guardians of the Galaxy, I had just finished God of War 2018, which I've already mentioned how disappointed I was with that game, especially its story. So when I was playing Marvel Guardians of the Galaxy, I couldn't help but notice how much better it was in comparison. The walkie-talkie sections, for example, were far superior thanks to the impeccable writing and performances of the dialogue. At the same time, because you're constantly given a lot of dialogue options throughout the entire game, the walkie-talkie sections never feel stale or boring, since the character actively interacts with you based on your choice, or even when you're just goofing around. The writing in this game was really the strongest aspect. It's easily the funniest game I've ever played. The humor in this game is absolutely sublime. At the same time, the story was equally capable of invoking powerful emotions when it needed to as well. After playing this game, I can absolutely see why this won Best Narrative in the Game Awards back in 2021. Highly recommended. Alright, we're finally getting to the moment you've all been waiting for, my pick for Game of the Year for 2022. Now I have to say that 2022 was a fantastic year for gaming. There were so many great releases that came out, and as I've talked about in this video, I had a really good time with most of the games, even old games from my backlog. But there's one particular experience that stayed with me ever since I played it. A game that truly stood apart from every other game I played in 2022. And that game is Xenoblade Chronicles 3. As someone who enjoyed the previous 2 games in the series, I had high expectations for the latest installment, and I must say that Xenoblade Chronicles 3 absolutely blew those expectations out of the water. Xenoblade Chronicles 3 truly felt like the ultimate combination of the Xenoblade experience. The gameplay and structure are the best yet, building on the best parts of the previous games while eliminating the pain points that have plagued the previous 2 installments. But what really makes Xenoblade Chronicles 3 such a special experience and something that still resonates to me and to a lot of people is its exceptional storytelling and narrative themes. This is a game that deals with heavy subject matter, particularly the theme of life and death. The game is set in Ionios, a world where 2 nations are in a never-ending war. People's life energy are essential to a colony's survival, so people are constantly required to kill others just to stay alive. It's a world where the tagline, live to fight and fight to live, is the only law. On top of that, every person in Ionios only has a lifespan of 10 years. When they reach the end of the 10th year, they die. This is a premise that hooked me right from the start. The tension and stakes established just keep on building up as I progress through each chapter and side quest. And while the theme of life and death has been explored countless times in fiction, the way Xenoblade Chronicles 3 handles it is truly remarkable. The game is filled with so many iconic scenes and imagery, with some of the best direction in animation, voice acting and music in any video game. If you have played the game, you'll know what I mean. When those tensions hit a boiling point, the scenes that accompany them really hit home, and they left a very long-lasting impact. And those are the strong and poignant moments that stay with you long after you finish the game. The intertwining themes are deeply introspective, and they make you think about life and death in ways you have never imagined. Of course, no discussion of Xenoblade Chronicles 3 will be complete without talking about the phenomenal soundtrack. Let me tell you, this game has hands down the best soundtrack of 2022. It's a true masterpiece, with every track perfectly tying together with the gameplay, story and themes. I've always appreciated when a soundtrack plays a significant role in both the story and gameplay. A very famous example would be The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, where the ocarina instrument was such an important part of the story, gameplay, that the soundtrack became iconic. The same thing applies to the flutes in Xenoblade Chronicles 3. The flutes in Xenoblade Chronicles 3 serves a very important role in the world of Ionios. It is the primary instrument of seers used to send off the voice of the departed. The various ways in which the composers incorporated the flute into the soundtrack are simply sublime, and all the leitmotif dealing with the off-seer themes are just absolutely beautiful. The attention to detail in this soundtrack is unparalleled. The composers even went so far to create actual flutes that the characters used to add the precise sound they wanted. The result is a soundtrack that elevates the entire game to new heights, making it a truly unforgettable experience. To sum it up, Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is a truly exceptional game that has left a lasting impression on me. It's a game that exceeds expectations in every way, from its gripping narrative to its addictive gameplay to its phenomenal soundtrack. I plan to create another video in the future where we can dive into the game's plot and share my spoiler thoughts on the characters, themes and overall experience, so stay tuned for that. For now, that is why Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is without a doubt my game of the year for 2022. So that has been my gaming recap for 2022. If you want to watch my year in review for 2021, then click here. So long guys, so long.